Hey, welcome to Winkler Knives headquarters. I'm Jason. I'm sitting here with Daniel Winkler today. Daniel, before we get started, where are we at?
Well, this setting is New Year's Creek. It's on the property that where Karen and I live now, and this is part of her family's original land grant from 1854. So this has been her family since the beginning, since then, and it just happens to be a nice, tranquil spot.
It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place for sure. Well, today I'm really excited about this because we're going to talk about the historical origins of Winkler knives, and I'm really excited. Some people know some of the story, some people know bits and pieces, but we're sitting here with Daniel today, and we're going to talk about how he went from hand forged to Daniel Winkler, master bladesmith, to Winkler knives as it's known today. So Daniel, let's jump back to 1988. That's whenever you became, or you went full bore bladesmithing as a full-time gig, correct?
That's true. Karen and I both went full-time into nothing but knife making in 1988. Prior to that, we operated as a small part-time hobby business and then moved in 1988 to where we went full-time into making knives.
So 1988, that's a whole different era for knives, right? I mean, it's not like it is today. What did you come into?
Well, we actually started because I was interested in history and the tools and equipment from the 1700s, 1800s. We started doing black powder shooting matches and rendezvous and events. And primarily I was making product that was appropriate to the time period of these participants and reenactors from black powder industry. And that's really where we started making and selling our stuff, is to these guys that wanted to have better, more authentic equipment.
So you were doing the black powder shoots, the reenactments, and you were doing jewelry shows and
Well, we started off primarily in the black powder events, and then we started getting into, because we had to make a living, we couldn't just rely on that. We got into some of the higher-end juried craft shows in the North Carolina mountains and surrounding areas, and that helped us build a more diverse customer base and collector base for what we were making. We would go to black powder events, and we were a natural there because we were making equipment that fit in with these people's lifestyle for their time off doing these events. And then in the craft shows, it was kind of like we were a oasis for men, because if you've been to these nice high-end craft shows, a lot of the stuff that's for sale there is more oriented towards women.
Sure.
And so we set up with a table of knives and hatchets and accessories, and it's like the guys that got tired of looking at pottery and jewelry would just come and hang out with us. So it ended up being a real good place for us to build a customer base.
So you're breaking into the knife business in the late 80s, right? So you're sort of an anomaly. Your blades you're bringing to bear are a little different than what everybody's used to and buying.
Well, didn't really know that at that time, because early on we didn't really have a whole lot of knowledge of knife shows. So when we started picking up true knife shows, the majority of the items being displayed and sold at these shows were very different than the historical designs and rustic looks and textures that we were working with our knives and sheaths. So it was a little hard to get our foot in the door in the knife industry. We still supplemented and still did very well with the new customer base through the craft shows and the black powder events and shooting matches. The knife world was a little different. It took a little longer to get our foot in the door.
So you said that your basis and what you were doing was utilitarian, and it was based on historic knife and tool designs from the early 1800s.
Yeah, I used a lot of influence from the researching equipment, knives and hatchets and other equipment of that era, and then which was utility based. So what we made from the beginning, we always tried to make highly functional tools. And in that regard, what we were doing was also authentically styled to where a reenactor could use this on their equipment and it flow and fit in with the time period they're portraying. And then as we got more and more into it and got better at what we were doing, and my knives got better and more refined, and Karen's sheaths just went beyond anything anybody had ever seen with the rawhide coverings and the old bead decoration and fringe and what she perfected. We started getting more of a following even in the custom knife industry. Even though it was a little slow, it started coming together.
I know you told me before that back in the 1800s, a man or a person's knife was a big deal. You didn't have 3 or 4 different knives that you were able to pack across the United States. You had a good one, right?
Everything that you had on your equipment, your gear, was what you had to rely on, from your footwear and your clothing to your whatever bit of shelter you might carry, to your equipment, your knife, your hatchet, shooting bags, powder horns, a rifle. Everything had to earn its place to be carried in the wilderness, because you weren't pulling a trailer. You couldn't take a lot of extra gear. It's just what you could carry.
And it's life or death. I mean, if your knife fails you when you need it, you could be done.
That's exactly right. So early on, we tried to make sure that our equipment was able to perform in the environments for the chores that were necessary for survival.
And that transitions on forward today. But so your foot's in the door. You've just become a master bladesmith in 1993, correct?
Correct.
So your things are starting to pick up for you. You're starting to get a good customer base. I'm sure that you're selling a bunch of hand forged stuff at that time. Around 1992, 1993, something happened to really start to push Daniel Winkler, master bladesmith, into the forefront. What happened there?
Well, it did. We learned that they were doing a remake of the film Last of the Mohicans, and it was based out of Asheville, North Carolina. Just so happened one of our craft shows at that time was on the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, so we had a case full of our period correct knives to take to this show. And so when we got there, we contacted the offices for the production. They put us in touch with the props master by the name of Ron Downing, who said, well, I happen to have a meeting with director Michael Mann this evening. He hasn't been happy with anything I've shown him in the world of cutlery so far. Could you possibly bring your stuff and let's take a look at it during this meeting? So, of course, we did. And from that point on, through the complete filming for months and months, we made knives and tomahawks for the production. And so we would go in one week, and Michael and Ron would tell us what they wanted to see the next week. We'd go home and make it, and then come back for the production meeting the next week. They would evaluate it and decide what to use it for, or to move to something else. So it took several weeks of pre-production to get the equipment that was going to be carried in prominent fashion by the principal characters. So we worked primarily with principal characters. We had some items on secondary characters, but they were mostly what we built as far as we were developing what they wanted. So they had been to museums and taken photographs and gotten samples of knife blades and handles. They even sent me an original tomahawk from a museum at Fort Meigs. That was the base for the one that I made for the character Magua, with the stair-step handle and the triangular shaped head. That was one of the few things that from the beginning never changed. We copied that one. The only thing we did different was made it larger. Yeah. But then the knives went through transitions and so we ended up outfitting Daniel Day-Lewis, his Hawkeye, his knife was ours. Uncas, the Indian brother, his knife was one that we made. Magua's tomahawk. And so those are prominently featured in the film. There was another knife maker, Randall King from Asheville, that did some principal character knives. He did like Chingachgook's knife, and Magua's knife were made by a guy named Randall King. So there was a lot more cutlery needed to film this, to do this movie, than we could have done. So we concentrated more on the principal characters that we were involved with.
Well, that makes sense. So 1993 is still a two-person show. You and Karen are working right away.
That's correct.
You're supporting your households solely on knives, really.
That's right. We were supporting 2 households, actually, because we both had houses and only children, and so we kept 2 households, and I worked at mine and she worked at hers, and then we worked together from there right until now, and still now.
So I just think it's fascinating that you're still doing your hand forged stuff, you're still working hard, meeting customer requirements, and now you're running back and forth to Asheville, you're handling all that stuff with the movie production. All right, so you get through the production, your name gets out there a little more, I assume. You're still doing your hand forged pieces.
Yep.
This movie kicks off something else. Last of the Mohicans brings something else to bear.
Well, it's amazing how things happen, because at that time when the movie was released, this special operations operator in the Naval Special Warfare had been charged by his team to find a replacement to become, for some equipment they had that they weren't happy with, to be a breaching combat hatchet that was easy to carry, easy to access on their kit. And so he had gone to this movie, Last of the Mohicans, saw the tomahawk we did from Agua, reached out and located us and said, hey, this is what I need. I'm in Naval Special Warfare. Can you help? And I thought, I'll be happy to, he said. And so we talked for a long time about what it needed to be able to do.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I'd been working on hatchets for the reenactors and our collector, our user market. And there was this little small hatchet called the Fort Meigs axe that was very small and compact. But the problem with it is it had a really small handle that was all wood with a through the eye design.
Okay.
And so it was weak and we had trouble with them breaking. And so I had developed a full tang hatchet, same as I would a full tang knife, that had the strength now, but still the functionality and ease of carry for this time period hatchet. And so we looked at that and he said, you know, that might do it. Can we change the back end from a hammer pole to a spike for combat? So I did that. I made the axe for him. He loved it. He took it to his squadron. They loved it. They wanted them, but there was issues with funding, because at that time it was around $350. And so that's just the time and the effort that it took to make. And that was way more expensive than anything in that realm of cutlery that they'd been used to. And so the government wasn't willing to fund it. But this operator carried that one axe during the first Gulf War conflict. Then after that one ended, he carried on hundreds of missions during that war. He got out of the Navy and he became a game warden. He still carried this hatchet with him as his duties as a game warden in Wilkes County. I think maybe even where you're from.
Yeah, it is where I'm from, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So were they, I guess they were carrying some type of hawk. I mean, I know the Vietnam had the through the eye type hawk that
Right.
soldiers were carrying.
What they were being given, for most part, was not being carried. It's so much equipment in our military. They have needs, but they have to justify the space it takes up on your kit. Sure. You have limited space. And so most of what they're being issued, because they were purchased through procurement officers, their job is to get it as cheap as they can. And unfortunately, that sometimes meant it wasn't suitable for the jobs that they do. So a lot of times, their equipment stayed on the shelf when they went in the field.
So there was something more important they needed to take.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so with this hatchet, it earned space on this operator's kit. And so after he'd been a game warden, 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And so he realized he had skills that were needed in a new conflict. So he went back into the special operations community, but this time in Army Special Operations. He still had the hatchet. His teammates recognized the functionality of it, and they contacted me to outfit this new team. So at that time, it was 10, 12 years later, I hand forged 16 more of these hatchets in the same basic style, sold them for the same $350. So I thought, these guys, even our prices had gone up by then because we had gained popularity and we had to order backlog, but we knew these guys might really need them. And so we hand forged 16 more for this new team that the operator was on now in the Army.
So, like you said, 10 or 12 years has passed since the initial conception and the build of this hawk, right?
Right.
So now you've done some different things, right? You've increased your footprint in the knife world, the custom knife world. You have a huge following. You're you're how many years behind at this point in time with hand-forged pieces?
Well, at that point in time, we were coming up, we were probably, we're selling out at the shows we went to, even the knife shows and the craft shows. And then we also had an order backlog because we were getting more orders in for our primitively styled one-of-a-kind pieces of my knives and Karen sheaths. So probably it ranged anywhere from 2 to 5 years, maybe even up as high as 6 years on order deliveries. And so we went ahead and worked in these axes, which kind of flowed well with what I was doing because they're all one-of-a-kind hand-forged, even though they're similar. And then these Army operators did some cross-training and deployments back with the original Navy team, the first operator had been on. They got a hold of one of these hatchets, and now they wanted to outfit their whole squadron with it, which was way more numbers than was reasonable for us to try to make one at a time, with Karen and I just working at the shop in the forge.
So again, it's just you and Karen. Y'all are working
just me and Karen, right?
handling all the hand-forged stuff. Now you're getting these orders for these guys who really need some quality equipment, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
And you're like, I got all these hand-forged stuff I need to be doing, but I need to start producing this for these guys because they really need it. That's going to start hurting you money-wise, right? I mean,
well, yeah, but it seemed very important.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at ways to make them more efficiently without losing any of the performance. So instead of hand forging, I started utilizing water jet cuts with contractors, and then we take the blanks, the hatchet blanks, hand grind the bevels. I used a milling machine to mill the tangs, either tapered or mill tang to reduce the weight, put the weight in the head so we got the high performance. Still did the same bevel grinds and heat treatment, everything that I would have done as a one-of-a-kind hand-forged piece, knowing what kind of performance it would have that would be adequate for these men that literally are putting their life on the line with their equipment. And so we started that a little bit and wanted to increase our production, initially thinking maybe we can just contract out all these operations to others who are more suited for manufacturing processes.
bigger companies are already set up.
We had the same shop, we had the same personnel, it's just two of us, and it was becoming difficult to carry on both businesses. And so we talked to many other either manufacturers that do cutlery, and then we also talked to subcontractors that one would do the cutting, one would do the heat treating, one would do the grinding. And what we found out is other manufacturing methods were not necessarily in line with what I knew we had to have to create truly unfailing performance to the highest level that we could. And so Karen and I talked about it and decided if we're going to do this at all, we're going to do it right. We're not going to create anything that's got potential to fail. And quite frankly, we got into some big heated discussions over this. Karen is very practical, and she's got a very strong business mind. Apart from her tremendous art talents,
Yeah.
she looks at things realistically. And where I was thinking, this is more important, we got to do this, she was thinking, yeah, but we still got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
We're falling behind on what we know brings in income for a whole new direction. And not only that, we may be seen as we're trying to jump on some tactical knife bandwagon. And so through multiple discussions on this subject, I finally convinced her that the importance of what my vision was worth giving it a shot. And so she got in 100%. We looked into other ways to do it. We would utilize some part-time help, even to the point of expanding our equipment to make operations go better.
So you have your hand-forged business that you've been building and working and sweating on for 12, 13, 14, 15 years. You got a great client base. They're expecting a product. Then you have this naval special warfare operator come to you and say, hey, we really need this. And so you're all about getting them the quality equipment because your background is you've looked at all this stuff and you realize a knife, a hatchet, this is life or death. This is life or death for these men. And there's no substitution for quality at that point in time.
There's not, and it falls back on even our historic designs. The people that we were emulating in what we were making back 250 years ago, they were in the same predicament. Their equipment had to perform. It was a life and death situation. So we used those designs and thought processes into modern day with these operators that were literally life and death situations.
So here you sit, you realize you're getting ready to have to start a production run of some kind. You're going to have to spend money. You're going to have to buy some equipment. You've already got Karen worried about bills because obviously everybody has to pay bills. But you're willing to break even or to barely get by to get these operators, these weapons, these tools that they need. That's what happened.
That's exactly right. We knew that it was going to cost us income because it was not only a new venture and direction for us. These operators that, they didn't have tons of money. The government was very difficult to get approval to spend government funding. So we made a lot of hatchets, and we used private funding to finance them, and did it at a very low, pretty close to break-even cost, just to be able to get these tools in the hands of the men we felt like needed them. We were still doing our hand forged pieces, and that was paying the bills, but our time now had to be split between different business processes that we had to really consider, are we doing the right thing or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a lot going on. I mean, it's a lot happening.
Well, we got up early, we stayed up late, we worked 7 days a week, a lot of times getting ready for trade shows, knife shows. And, when we were making these hatchets for the operators, and, it ended up being, as far as production went, first was an Army team, then a Navy team, then a second Navy squadron. And so it was growing. We were having to put the time into it, which was taken away from our others. So we had to make changes to be able to grow that side of the business without compromising quality and performance.
So you've got a couple teams come to you now, and you're starting to work on these hatchets. All of a sudden, another team comes to you with a whole different thing they want to start working on.
Well, yeah, one of the teams we were doing the hatchets for decided we need a new combat knife. Now, a combat knife is perceived many times as this big Rambo knife and all that, which is great. Sure, a lot of combat people have used knives like that. But realistically, like I said, every piece of equipment you carry has to be integrated into your kit, which has to be accessible. It has to earn its place. And the worst piece of equipment you got is the one that stays on the shelf when you go in the field.
Yeah. So
it's not there for you. So we worked with this naval group on developing a knife that was, at that time we were calling it a field knife, and worked with them to get the properties and the features that they needed, but still stayed somewhat true to our roots, knowing it's got to be a high-performance, functional piece of equipment, which integrated very well. And so we developed this knife, and it was kind of interesting because, again, these people that do procurement, their job, and they do it very well, is to get equipment at the lowest price they can. And so frequently, when a piece goes in for testing by a review committee, which is both operators in the field, officers, and equipment testers, they have to all get together, test out usually multiple different submissions, and then they select the one that is best, which has to be taken into account also the costing of it. So we were able to do our submission and write out the description in such detail that the procurement people could not substitute a lesser quality knife in place of what the team and the testers decided was their best option, which was our knife. And so anybody that manufactured it had to follow the written description, which was so detailed it would be very difficult. And then knowing from talking to other manufacturers how they make things, I wrote in the details of how we make things, and knowing that they couldn't substitute a cheaper method of producing a piece of equipment that looked the same but wouldn't perform the same. And that's one thing that we've always done at Winkler Knives since the very beginning. We always strive to make improvements in performance, design flow, balance, every aspect, materials. So every operation that we set up our operations in the beginning to be very similar to what I did as a one-of-a-kind shop, one at a time. So we set up our production methods to do the same thing, but anytime that we could enhance that by making it more efficient, by doing larger numbers or an improved piece of equipment or something, we could do that as long as it didn't take away from the overall design flow and performance. We would accept changes, and we still do that practice today.
And that's exceptional. I mean, when manufacturers are cutting back on materials and quality and overall stuff, Winkler is still pushing forward with, it's going to be the best, or we're not going to put it out there.
That's exactly right. And if that costs more to do it that way, that's what we accept, knowing we're not going to be the entry level for the guys coming into it in the beginning. We're not going to get massive orders for these things because we know what it takes to make them, and we make sure it happens that way, which can be expensive, but we feel very confident in our performance.
So you're starting your own production side of the house here. You're doing your hand forged, and this is about the time Winkler 2 starts to evolve, right? Winkler Knives 2.
Well, because we developed these production methods to outfit these military teams, we decided, we need to do it more and do it better, and that's going to allow us to improve our methods and also get more efficient and not lose so much money doing it. And so we decided, well, let's take this new product line, these limited manufactured pieces, and introduce them to the knife public and see how that goes.
So what were the entries into the civilian market?
Well, the first models we did, or the first one was the belt knife, and it was pretty much a slightly changed civilian version of the knife we did for the Naval Special Warfare Command. And then we added in another larger knife, which we call the field knife. We changed the name of that knife to the belt knife. We made a larger version of the field knife, which was better for camping and that sort of thing. And then we also started introducing another hatchet because we knew we couldn't take these squadron-specific hatchet designs to the general public because they were made for these specific squadrons, and we would not do that. So we developed another hatchet called Combat Axe that had design features from several of the different military versions we did, but it was not restricted. We could sell it on the open market to individuals or other military groups that wanted a hatchet but weren't really in position to develop their own exclusive design.
So the Combat Axe and the belt knife, they saw military. They're still seeing military
They
service.
still are see military service through many other units that saw or had interaction with these Tier 1 teams, saw their equipment, they saw the effectiveness of it and how they carried, so we made items that were not restricted. That was what we offered to the general public, and both at knife shows primarily.
So you're introducing a whole new line to the general public. What does your classic customer base think of this new line?
They had no interest in it at all.
Really?
Yeah, when we started taking these new manufactured pieces, even though they were still ours, to shows and introduce them in front of our market that we had developed in the custom knife industry and the craft shop shows, and they had no interest in it. And so we realized, even to the point we had to present them in a different way. And so in the early days, when we had both product lines, we would have our regular table, say at the blade show in the ABS section for our hand forged pieces, and then we'd have another 10 by 10 booth in the manufacturer's second with Winkler, the manufactured pieces, which we decided we would promote as Winkler Knives 2, as in a second version of Winkler knives, also an also. They're also Winkler knives, just different.
Yeah.
But we didn't want anybody to confuse the one-of-a-kind hand pieces, which even though we operated those under Daniel Winkler hand forged, they still were referred to as Winkler knives. So we added the two to the manufacturer just to avoid any confusion of the public that I'm not making all of these knives. I have help. They're under our direction, but they're not necessarily work that Karen and I do all the work to.
But you're still doing a lot of work because you're using old, antiquated grinders, and tell me about that.
Yeah, when we started getting into knowing we had to increase our productivity, I located a couple of old school Nicholas grinders and purchased them because I thought, well, this is what companies were using to grind production knife blades. Well, to get one of those and grind our knife blades with it. Well, yes and no. First, it was no. There was all these machines with power requirements and buttons and tooling blocks and limit switches and all kinds of stuff that I wasn't real familiar with. And so I got the power up to it and just started pushing buttons and moving levers and seeing what it did. And I didn't know at the time that what I was trying to do with these machines, I finally did achieve. They weren't made for doing that. These machines were made to be worked in pairs. And so you had one to grind the right side of the blade, another to grind the left side of the blade, but you didn't mix them. Well, I only had one. I had two machines, but they were totally different, made at totally different times in totally different ways. So I figured out how to use them and set up the tooling for them to grind all of the side one, then change the tooling and settings and grind all of side two using supports. I was told later that, that's not possible. Well, it was possible. They weren't great. They weren't totally accurate. We could remove on a knife maybe 75% of the steel that had to come off to make it become a knife with a blade bevel and a tapered tang. The rest of it all had to be done by hand, which we did for many, many years. The axes, same thing. I could do rough blade bevels, tang tapers, and we could get them maybe to about 60% finished grinding. Then we had to take them into hand grinding. But it did help improve efficiency so we could produce more, offer to more customers, expand our reach both in military, law enforcement, and the outdoors market.
Yeah, wow. So you're not only a master bladesmith, you're pretty much an engineer. If you can figure it out. I have trouble putting together cabinets and stuff like that. I can't imagine thinking of no instructions and jumping on a machine here.
I'm fortunate I have some mechanical reasoning ability. And Karen has great mechanical reasoning, and she was helpful in all that too. And so we were able to get them to where they would operate like we needed them to, up again till a certain point when we needed to continue with our expansion. And so that's what we do. But like I told you before, every single machine change, operation change, things we don't change at all, has to be better for the overall design, performance, and design flow, balance. Everything that makes our knives what they are, we can't compromise that in any way, and so we don't.
So you're making these semi-production tools for the military, and you're making them for the civilian market now. And rumors are starting to circulate in the blade community about Tier 1 operators using certain tools, right? But it's starting to come out.
Yeah. There were quite a few rumors that came out because information gets out, whether it's supposed to or not. Now, we working with the teams we were working with, and even now, we don't talk about any specifics. General naval special warfare covers a lot of people. Army special operations, same things. And because we don't get specific, because these operators go through years of training and selection, and they're very protective of their identities. Therefore, it is not our place to say who they are and what we're doing. And so we never did. Information got out anyway, although it didn't come from us. And so there were times when I would have other makers or magazine writers say, hey, I heard that you had equipment that was used in a recent news report of some high-level operation. I need a comment from you on that. And all I could tell them is I have no comment for you. Now, even one of them went as far as say, well, you have to either confirm or deny. And I said, no, I don't have to tell you anything. And so we didn't talk about it. But then what really changed that was in what year was it?
It's 2012, wasn't it?
2012, yeah. Soon after Operation Neptune Spear that killed Osama bin Laden happened, one of the operators on that mission wrote a book called No Easy Day, The Killing of Osama bin Laden. And in this book on page 202, it describes his personal equipment, which was a knife on his belt made by Daniel Winkler. And so it kind of confirmed all these rumors. We had a lot more people coming for comments and reports, which we handled in the same way as we have before, but it kind of changed our acceptance in that part of our knife world. And it was all of a sudden, okay, they are legitimate.
So if I'm not mistaken on this, prior to 2012, you had 3 employees.
Yeah, I think we had 3 full-time, maybe a part-time, but then after that book came out, our web hits quadruples instantly. Our orders, massive changes in the number of orders we were getting from not only military squadrons and military groups wanting to outfit their guys, but civilians that were learning and read this book and said, hey, if it's good enough for these guys, it's good enough for me. And so our orders really increased. So I think we ended up going up immediately almost 8 people in the shop. And so then as far as we had to go, we had to continue to improve our equipment. For example, like we were cutting out handles with a bandsaw, stacking wood or rubber and cutting out handles with a bandsaw. Well, one of our first piece of equipment we got was a CO2 laser. And so we could cut out the handles with the laser, have one operator doing it at a much higher level of efficiency without taking anything away from the quality and the performance of the knife. Same handle, just more efficient operation.
So it fascinates me, and it just blows my mind that you never took any publicity at all when you were struggling, breaking even, selling and getting these guys these tools that protect them, that change their lives and do all that. You never once, you went into it knowing you were not going to do well with this. You were not going to make money. You were not going to do everything, And then this book comes out, and all these rumors that have been swirling around were validated, and it's just amazing to me. I mean, you did this for nothing other than to serve our country, and that blows my mind.
A lot of people have asked me, say, were you in the military? Did you have military service? And I was never in the military. That is not where my service was. My service has been and still is in making sure people in the field that need to rely on their equipment have what they need to do their job, and that is where my service comes into play. And so I've never served in the military, but I certainly have devoted a good portion of my life in carrying her life and to making sure they have what they need to keep us free to do what we do.
You've absolutely sacrificed for the country, absolutely, and I'm proud to be sitting here with you. Honestly, I am. One more thing. The Winkler logo, been there and back. What is that all about?
Well, that was a line and a logo that Karen came up with based on our history. And when we started working with the military operators and developing and making the equipment that they actually took on mission and went in the field with, and they came back, and unfortunately, many times only the equipment made it back. But literally, it's what it says it is. That equipment has been there and come back. In more cases than not, it's gone back again. So what we have strived to do is make a piece of equipment, of cutlery, a knife or a hatchet, that is not only going to serve them on their current deployment, but on future deployments, even in many cases handed down to their children. I have one operator right now that was Tier 1 military. In fact, that person we talked to, and his son now carries one of the axes that I made for him, and he is in an Army Tier 1 group now, using it the same and carrying the same very axe that his dad carried. And so it's nice to know that it's almost a legacy piece that can be handed down. And if we can achieve that level of quality and performance, we've done our job right.
You've done your job well. Some people have heard bits and pieces of this, but it's just fascinating to me how it all came together. And it's a great story. And we're going to do a lot more of these, right? We're going to get so detailed eventually, and Karen and I are working on it now, where we're going to start at the very beginning when I made my first knife as a high school shop project. So stay tuned. We'll get into more of this and go all the way through what we're doing now. It's going to take a while, but hopefully there'll be somebody that'll be interested. Thank y'all for joining me and Daniel today. Remember, Winkler Knives, been there and back.